This story comes from a man named Jason, a 27-year-old backpacker from Ohio, USA. Jason wasn't wealthy. He worked an ordinary job at a local retail store, lived simply, and rarely took long vacations. But he had one passion: saving just enough money, little by little, to explore the countries he had always dreamed of. Japan was at the top of that list. Since childhood, Jason had been fascinated by Japanese culture, its temples, its mysterious traditions, the old ryokan inns, and the eerie folklore that seemed woven into everyday life. He often watched documentaries and read about how Japan was a place where ancient history and modern life lived side by side. When the chance finally came, Jason booked a short 5-day trip in the spring. He planned carefully: a couple of days in Tokyo, a visit to Kyoto, and, most importantly, one night in a traditional ryokan. He didn't know that single night would leave him with memories he still struggles to forget. Jason didn't want a modern hotel. He wanted something authentic. Scrolling through Google Maps, he found a small ryokan on the outskirts of Kyoto. The photos looked simple but charming: tatami floors, sliding paper doors, futon beds, and a little bamboo garden outside the rooms. The price was surprisingly cheap, cheaper than most hostels in the city. The online reviews were all positive: quiet and comfortable, traditional atmosphere, great for travelers, peaceful stay, no warnings, no strange remarks. Everything seemed normal. Jason booked it without hesitation. He arrived just before sunset after a long train ride. From the outside, the building looked old, made of dark, weathered wood. The paint was fading, and the air around it felt heavier compared to the bustling city he had just left. A paper lantern hung above the entrance, glowing faintly with kanji letters Jason couldn't read. A middle-aged woman in a plain gray kimono greeted him. Her smile was faint, almost expressionless, but polite. Her English was limited, yet enough to guide him to his room. The room was simple: fresh tatami mats, a neatly laid futon, a low wooden table with a tea set, and a small window overlooking the bamboo garden. The only sound came from the bamboo leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. Jason loved it. This was exactly the Japan he had imagined. After a quick dinner near the stations, Jason returned to the ryokan and tried the small ofuro, the traditional bath. The warm water eased his muscles after a long day. By 11 p.m., he was ready to sleep. He turned off the lights, leaving only the faint moonlight spilling through the window. But around 1 a.m., Jason woke up. He didn't know why at first, until he heard it. Footsteps, soft but heavy, echoing along the wooden hallway outside his room. Jason froze. Maybe it was just another guest returning late, he thought. But then the footsteps stopped, right in front of his door. For several seconds there was silence. Then came another sound, the faint drag of fabric across the wooden floor. Jason pictured the hem of a kimono trailing slowly as someone walked. And then, silence again. Eventually, Jason drifted back to sleep, though unease lingered. At around 3 a.m., Jason woke again, but this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was the overwhelming sense that someone was in the room with him. He forced his eyes half open, and there, near the sliding paper door, stood a woman. Her long black hair fell over her face. Her kimono looked old, faded, almost tattered, her head tilted downward, motionless. Jason's chest tightened. His mouth went dry. He wanted to shout, to move, but his body wouldn't respond. The woman began to walk slowly toward him. The sound of fabric brushing against the tatami floor was sharp in the silence. When she stopped beside his futon, Jason expected silence. Instead, he heard something else. A voice. The woman began to sing. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything Jason understood. The melody was slow, mournful, like an ancient Japanese lullaby. The words were foreign, but the tone was haunting, flat, drawn out, and echoing with sadness. Jason's entire body tensed. The voice wasn't far away. It was right next to his ear. He wanted to cover his ears, but he couldn't move. He felt paralyzed. All he could do was listen as the song repeated, verse after verse, hypnotic and suffocating. It didn't sound like a song meant to comfort a child. It sounded like a song meant to trap someone in endless sleep. Jason's heart pounded. His skin turned cold. The lullaby wrapped around his thoughts until he couldn't think clearly anymore. He started to feel as though the melody wasn't just being sung to him, but inside him, as though the voice had crawled into his head. Sweat drenched his back. He tried to pray silently, tried to force himself awake, but the voice only grew sharper, closer. At one point, Jason felt warm breath against his ear, synchronized with the song as if the woman was leaning down over him, whispering every note directly into his skull. He was sure he would lose his mind. And then, suddenly, the singing stopped. The silence was even worse. Jason lay there, frozen, listening to his own heartbeat hammering in his chest. He didn't dare open his eyes. He didn't dare breathe too loud. Minutes crawled by. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him back into unconsciousness. Jason awoke to daylight streaming through the small window. The room was empty, quiet. The futon was damp with sweat. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then he noticed something. His ears still buzzed. The melody still lingered faintly in his mind, clear enough that he could hum it back to himself, even though he didn't understand the words. There were no scratches, no bruises, no physical marks on him at all. But his reflection in the mirror told the story. Pale face, bloodshot eyes, and dark circles under them, as though he hadn't slept at all. Jason quickly packed his belongings. He went downstairs to return his key. The same woman who had welcomed him the night before stood at the front desk. She looked at him briefly, expressionless, then gave him the faintest smile. Jason muttered a quiet, "Thank you." She didn't ask why he was checking out early. She didn't ask anything at all. She only nodded, almost as if she already knew what had happened. Jason walked out of the ryokan quickly, refusing to look back. He finished the rest of his trip in Japan, but he never truly relaxed again. Every night, even in modern hotels, he feared he might hear that same lullaby in the dark. Weeks later, back in Ohio, Jason started researching. He learned that many ryokan in Japan carry dark histories, sites of suicides, mysterious deaths, or simply places believed to be haunted by restless spirits. He never discovered the specific history of the ryokan he stayed in, but he knew one thing for certain. The song was real. He wrote about his experience on a travel forum, ending his post with a simple warning: if you ever travel to Japan, be careful where you stay. Some places have a history you don't want to be part of. To this day, Jason says he sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night with that same melody faintly echoing in his ears. Like the woman never truly left his side. His name was Howard, a 32-year-old freelance photographer from Seattle. He lived a life of unstable projects and modest income, but it gave him the freedom he needed. Freedom to travel, to explore, to chase images that others overlooked. Unlike many tourists who came to Japan seeking neon lights, bullet trains, and crowded temples, Howard wanted something different. He wanted to find the quiet places, the towns and villages that didn't appear in glossy travel magazines. He wanted to see where old traditions still lingered, where the silence itself seemed like a story waiting to be told. That's how he found the name of a small village, buried deep in reviews on Google Maps and obscure forums. A place people described as beautiful, but unsettling. They said it was quiet, too quiet, as if time had slowed down there. Some travelers praised the calm, while others admitted they left early because the atmosphere felt off. To Howard, that was perfect. He booked a night in a small family-run hotel in the village. From the photos, it looked ordinary enough. A 2-story wooden building with a tiled roof, lanterns hanging by the entrance, and a narrow street leading into misty hills. But one night, there was all it would take for Howard to remember the village forever. The small local train stopped at the station around 5 in the evening. The air was still cool from spring, and a thin mist curled around the mountains. Howard stepped out with his camera bag slung over one shoulder, the sound of his boots echoing on the old wooden platform. The walk to the hotel took less than 10 minutes. The streets were nearly empty. A couple of elderly villagers passed by, bowing slightly as they went. Wooden houses lined the stone road, their tiled roofs darkened by moisture. Somewhere nearby, the faint sound of running water whispered from a stream. It was picturesque, like stepping into a photo from another century. Yet Howard felt an edge to the beauty, something that made the back of his neck prickle. The silence wasn't the kind that relaxed you. It was the kind that pressed in too close, leaving no space for your own breath. When he reached the hotel, a lantern swayed gently above the entrance. The front desk was little more than a wooden counter, with an old calendar and a thick guest book. Behind it stood an elderly man with a neutral expression. Howard signed his name in the guest book. The man handed him a brass key with the number 203 etched on it. "Are there many guests tonight?" Howard asked politely. The man gave a small shake of his head. "Not many. You'll have a quiet stay." Howard smiled, not noticing the faint pause before those words. He was too tired to think much of it. Room 203 was simple but clean. Tatami mats, a low wooden table, a futon neatly folded, and a paper lantern glowing softly in the corner. A sliding shoji door opened to a small balcony overlooking the street below. From there, Howard could see the mist growing thicker, swallowing the outlines of houses one by one. He set his bag down, showered quickly in the small bathroom, and felt his muscles loosen under the hot water. Traveling had worn him out, and tonight he wanted nothing more than sleep. By 11 o'clock, the room was dark. Howard lay under the futon blanket, the sound of wind tugging at the paper door. The hotel was silent. Until it wasn't. Just as he drifted towards sleep, Howard heard it. A laugh. Soft, quick, feminine. Coming from the room next door. He opened his eyes, listened. Nothing. Then faintly, the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Howard frowned. Maybe another guest had checked in late. Perfectly normal. He turned over and pulled the blanket closer, but at 2 in the morning, he woke again. This time the noises were clearer. Footsteps pacing the neighboring room, the creak of wood, the soft sound of someone humming. Howard sighed, annoyed more than afraid. The walls must have been paper thin. He tapped the wall lightly with his knuckles, hoping the neighbor would get the message. A moment later, a sound came back. The exact same tap. Howard sat up straight. His mouth went dry. Coincidence, he told himself. Nothing more. He stuffed the pillow over his head, but sleep came in fragments, chased away by whispers he swore were just behind the wall. Morning brought little relief. Howard dragged himself downstairs, dark circles under his eyes. The small dining area was empty except for him. He tried to laugh it off with the hotel owner. "The walls are thin here, huh? My neighbor was pretty active last night." The old man looked at him for a long moment, then flatly, "There are no other guests upstairs?" "Only you." Howard blinked. Maybe someone checked in late? The man shook his head. You're the only one on the second floor. A silence settled between them. Howard gave a weak smile, muttered something about being tired, and finished his breakfast quickly. But deep inside, unease had already taken root. Howard considered leaving early, but he convinced himself it had been fatigue, jet lag, or even a dream. Besides, one more night would give him a chance to explore the village in the morning light. That evening he returned to room 203. The mist outside was heavier than before, blanketing the street until even the lantern glow seemed to drown in it. At midnight, the noises returned. At first, it was faint movement, like fabric brushing against wood. Then came the sound of something dragging slowly across the floor next door. Not hurried, not frantic, just steady, deliberate. Howard froze on his futon. He held his breath, ears straining. Then a knock. One sharp knock against the shared wall. Howard's stomach twisted. Against his better judgment, he answered with a single knock back. The response was immediate. Another knock, louder this time. His skin crawled. He jumped up, slid open his door, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was empty. The neighboring door was shut, its handle still. Howard leaned close, listening. Silence. Only the soft hum of the building itself. He stood there for several minutes, waiting. Nothing. But when he returned to his room and slid the door shut, the knock came again, from directly behind him. By 3 a.m, Howard was wide awake, sitting up in bed with the lantern still on. His nerves were raw. Then he saw it. On the paper sliding door that led to the hallway, a shadow appeared. A tall figure, motionless, with long hair falling over its shoulders. Howard's breath caught. He didn't move. The shadow didn't either. It just stood there, inches away, separated only by a sheet of paper. Summoning every bit of courage, Howard crept forward. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. Just as his fingers touched it, the shadow shifted violently, vanishing in an instant. Howard stumbled back, heart hammering, his body slick with cold sweat. He didn't dare touch the door again. He kept the light on until dawn. By morning, his decision was final. He was leaving. He packed quickly and carried his bag downstairs. The owner was waiting, as if he already knew. The old man simply took the key, nodded and said nothing more. Howard wanted to ask. He wanted answers, but the words stuck in his throat. Something about the man's silence told him no explanation would bring comfort. On the train out of the village, Howard pressed his forehead to the window. Mist swallowed the buildings until nothing was left. He should have been relieved. Instead, he felt watched, even as the train carried him farther away. What haunted him most wasn't the laughter or the dragging sounds or even the shadow. It was the moment, just before dawn, when he swore he heard a voice from the next room, clear, close, and unmistakable. A woman's voice, softly speaking his name, Howard. Howard never returned to that village. Later he wrote about the experience in an online travel forum. Most dismissed it as exaggeration, fatigue, or the imagination of someone too invested in folklore. But a few replies chilled him. Other travelers claimed they too had stayed at that hotel. They too had heard noises from the neighboring room, and they too were told afterward that they were the only guest. Howard stopped reading after that. To this day, whenever he books a hotel, he makes one small request. He never, ever chooses a room with an empty one beside it. His name was Peter, a 29-year-old tourist from Vancouver, Canada. He loved urban travel, the hustle and bustle of big cities, neon lights, and nightlife. Japan had always been on his bucket list, and this time he chose Osaka, drawn by its unique mix of modern culture and traditional heritage. Peter usually booked 3- or 4-star hotels for comfort, but he also wanted a local touch. Little did he know, one night in a hotel in Osaka would become the most terrifying experience of his life. Peter arrived in Osaka around 4 p.m. The city was busy. People hustled along the streets. Vehicles honked, and the echo of subway trains filled the air. The hotel he booked looked modern from the outside, but inside it retained a classic Japanese charm. Wooden floors in the lobby, lantern-style lights hanging from the ceiling, minimalistic decorations, and a subtle aroma of polished wood. After checking in, the receptionist handed him the key to room 607 on the 6th floor. Peter noticed. The hotel was unusually quiet for this hour. The hallway leading to his room was almost deserted, and he felt a subtle unease he could not explain. Room 607 was spacious. A large bed, wide window overlooking Osaka, a soft corner lamp. Peter placed his bag down and checked emails on his laptop. Around 9 p.m., he showered and prepared for bed. Looking out the window, he admired the city lights reflected in the glass. Everything seemed normal until he heard it. A soft, childlike giggle, almost playful, seemed to come from the corner of the room. Peter turned around. Nobody was there. He shrugged, assuming it was probably noise from another part of the hotel or the streets below. But as he sat back on the bed, he heard it again. This time, accompanied by the sound of tiny footsteps, like a child running across the wooden floor, stopping near the door. Peter's heart raced. He turned on the lamp. The room remained empty. Throughout the night, the sounds persisted. Small footsteps, quiet laughter, sometimes even soft whispers, as if a child were calling his name. Peter tried to calm himself. Maybe it's just my imagination, he thought. He turned on the TV, but the noises continued, seemingly coming from different parts of the room at different times. At one point, he heard something coming from the closet. Slowly, the door creaked open, just enough to reveal a dark shadow inside. When he approached, nothing. Exhaustion weighed on him. He tried to cover his ears and close his eyes, but the giggling and tiny footsteps kept him on edge. Around midnight, Peter saw something in the reflection of the window. A child stood in the corner of the room. About 3 feet tall, black hair obscuring most of the face, wearing a worn white outfit. Peter froze. The child stood there, staring, not moving. When he switched on the main light, the figure vanished. But the footsteps continued, moving from corner to corner of the room. He attempted to record with his phone, but the screen only showed an empty room. The sound persisted, but visually there was nothing. Peter felt completely out of control. The room that was supposed to be safe now felt like a trap. Hour by hour, the disturbances grew. The child never physically harmed him, but the psychological torment was intense. Faint shadows in the bathroom mirror. Sliding doors opening and closing by themselves. Soft whispers calling his name. Peter. Peter. Peter tried to meditate, cover his ears, even fall asleep with his eyes shut. Nothing worked. He began to wonder if he was imagining things or if the long day of travel had pushed him over the edge. Yet every time he opened his eyes, there was a real sense of presence, as if someone or something was watching him, waiting. Around 3 a.m., Peter gathered the courage to turn on the main light. The shadowy child appeared again, clearer than ever. This time it stood in front of the window, staring straight at him. Peter wanted to speak but couldn't make a sound. He stepped closer, and suddenly the child vanished into thin air as if it had never been there. The aftermath was terrifying. The room felt smaller, colder, and heavier. Every movement he made seemed observed. When morning came, Peter awoke exhausted, pale, and with bloodshot eyes. He showered quickly and checked out immediately. At the reception desk, he asked if there were any other guests the night before. The receptionist looked at him calmly. "No! You were the only guest on the 6th floor last night." Peter froze. The disturbances of the previous night made no sense. He simply nodded, paid, and left the hotel as fast as possible. Outside, Osaka's morning air felt normal. Traffic, pedestrians, the sounds of the city, all ordinary. Yet the image of the child remained etched in his mind. Peter returned to Canada with mixed emotions, relief to be out of that hotel, but lingering fear and curiosity. He never went back, and every time he stayed at another hotel, he made sure to avoid rooms near empty ones. He wrote about his experience on his travel blog. Many dismissed it as imagination or travel fatigue. Yet some readers claimed similar encounters at Japanese hotels. Disturbances by child spirits, appearing and disappearing mysteriously. From that night on, Peter realized one undeniable truth. Some things in this world cannot be explained, and some presences can only be felt.